Well, hello everyone. I hope you guys have been having a great afternoon so far. Like they said, I'll be presenting today about cerebral oximetry and its paramountcy in perfusion. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into that. So we're going to start off with a little bit of introduction. So my name is Lara Al-Nakib, and I am the Clinical Sales Manager here at Mespure Life Sciences. A little bit about the company. We are a technology-based medical device innovator, and we're looking to really disrupt the market with our non-invasive solutions in primarily cardiac and neurohemodynamic patient monitoring. Our goal is to really provide a cost-effective solution to ensure that all of our patients do have access to the necessary technology so that they're really receiving the utmost patient-centered care. So I just wanted to walk you guys through a little bit of the presentation highlights for today, or what I kind of wanted to cover or go over with you. First, I wanted to really introduce the concept of cerebral oximetry, talk a little bit about the values and the variations that we're looking to monitor, the importance and why we really need to monitor cerebral oximetry for any sort of patient that goes on a heart-lung machine, as well as the current pain points in the market and how Mespure Life Sciences went about providing a solution to all of those struggles that we are facing. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. So some of you may already be familiar with the concept of cerebral oximetry, but to give a very basic definition, it really is a tool to measure the amount of oxygenated blood in the brain. The value is referred to as a regional tissue oxygenation, which is denoted by the RS-202. So in the recent years, cerebral oximetry has been adopted as an important physiological parameter to really be monitored during surgery. The outdated and sort of invasive methods have required a skilled practitioner to insert a catheter through the internal jugular vein to obtain a blood sample that is then analyzed using the blood gas machine. So although this method has been used in the past, there are a few issues with it. So when the patients are placed on the heart-lung machine, it is very important to ensure that the machine is effectively pumping the blood throughout the patient's body. All of their organs are receiving the necessary oxygen saturation, and just making sure everything's going according to plan. However, those samples do provide a great indicator of how oxygenated the blood sample is, but it doesn't really tell us much about the regional tissue oxygenation at the cerebral level. And this is where I wanted to introduce near-infrared spectroscopy, or for short NIRS, which is a great method to actually calculate the regional tissue oxygenation non-invasively and more accurately during procedures where patients are placed on the heart-lung machine. And it is really important to do so, and I'll be talking a little bit more later on about why, but when we are without that information, without these values throughout the entirety of the procedure or the surgery, oftentimes we are putting ourselves at risk of potentially developing cerebral hypoxia. All right, so to measure oxygenation in the cerebral blood, what we're really looking at is the hemoglobin concentration in both the arterial and the venous blood. So the blood in the cerebral tissue is 70% comprised of 70% venous blood and 30% arterial blood. And of course, the the hemoglobin concentration does differ as well between venous blood to arterial. So venous blood is comprised of mostly deoxyhemoglobin-rich blood, and that's why we see it to be a bit more of a darker red, whereas the arterial blood is comprised of mostly oxyhemoglobin-rich blood, and that gives it that more brighter red color. The oxyhemoglobin and the deoxyhemoglobin is also, they also do have different wavelengths. So deoxyhemoglobin is absorbed at roughly around 940 nanometers in the near infrared light, whereas oxyhemoglobin is absorbed at 660 nanometers. And so the way that we go about calculating the regional tissue oxygenation by using near-infrared spectroscopy is really just the ratio of the amplitude attenuation of the different near-infrared wavelengths. So kind of just having them placed over the temporal lobe, we're able to pick that up with photo emitters and photo detectors. And through our calculation and our computation that is happening at the sensor level, we come to a value at how oxygenated the blood is underneath that sensor. All right, so I kind of did want to provide somewhat of a range of the values that we're looking at to give you guys an understanding of what numbers we're working with here. So of course we have our optimal range between 60 to 90% oxygen saturation. That's what we like to see the values kind of hover around. When we dip a little bit down into the 50 to 60 or go a little bit higher into the 90 to 100%, we are in our cautionary range, and we definitely do want to be monitoring our patients a little bit more closely. However, values anywhere below 50% is an immediate intervention range, and that indicates a desaturation event is occurring, which has multiple complications, again, that I will be discussing later on. So of course, it's really important to monitor these numbers and to have an understanding of what numbers we're working with. But more importantly, what we're really looking to monitor here is the variation from baseline. So any change that is going to be greater than 10% is going to be considered a notable event, also called a desaturation event, and will need to be acted on accordingly. So I have a few points as to why it is really important to be monitoring regional tissue saturation during surgery. Oftentimes, these values are obtained preoperatively or postoperatively, however, never intraoperatively. And this is why I'm talking about, these are the reasons why I believe that we need to be monitoring this throughout the entirety of the surgery. So first, we may have heard this before. The brain is an index organ. What that means is that it's going to be giving us an insight into what is going on throughout the entirety of the patient's physiological status when the patient is on the heart-lung machine. So it is really important to monitor the saturation that the brain is getting, since it could be an early detector of any sort of long-term complications that may arise due to any sort of desaturation event. It is also really important to monitor cerebral oxygenation or cerebral perfusion because it does lead to a reduction in the time spent in the ICU. There's a lot of literature that is posted out there that supports that with monitoring patients intraoperatively, it will reduce their chances of a longer recovery time in the ICU. Of course, we also want to avoid any sort of cognitive decline that may come with patient receiving inadequate oxygen levels to the brain. So it's very important, of course, to monitor if a desaturation event has occurred, but what's also really important to monitor is the duration of it, because the duration of the desaturation event will really speak to the severity of any sort of or potential future cognitive declines that we may see. So those are the three main reasons I would say as to why it's really important. Of course, there are multiple other different factors, and we can dive a little bit into more detail later on. But as a high-level overview, these are the three main points. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about what the current limitations or struggles, the pain points that physicians and hospitals are facing when it comes to cerebral oxygen or oximetry monitoring. As I've mentioned before, invasive cerebral oximetry monitoring does come with a lot of complications. First, it is invasive. Not only are physicians shying away from using any sort of invasive procedures, but patients are now also opting for not to have to undergo any surgeries or procedures that are invasive. It is time inefficient, so it definitely takes time to take the sample and to run it through the blood gas machine, to obtain that value. But it is also non-continuous. So every about 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to need to obtain a blood sample that tells us how oxygenated the blood is at that moment in time. It is very healthcare practitioner dependent. I'm quite confident that potentially at the end of this presentation, once I walk you guys through everything, you are going to be experts at conducting your own values using our non-invasive solution. However, when you are doing so invasively, it takes a lot of skills, a lot of practice to be able to do that. And oftentimes it is the perfusionist that is conducting these measurements. It is also inaccurate in the sense that it is a great indicator in telling us the actual blood oxygenation on the blood sample oxygenation. However, it is not giving us an accurate understanding of what is happening at the cerebral level. As I said, since it is invasive, it does have an increased potential of any sort of infection rates. And with that, it does lead to a potential longer hospital stay. That becomes very costly on the hospital, sometimes even on the patient. It uses up more manpower and definitely resources that the hospital may need for other patients that are at a severe or at a more severe rate. So of course, thereby it increases the cost for hospitals, physicians, and like I said, potentially even patients. So I wanted to do a side-by-side between the different methods of the cerebral oximeter or ways about measuring. So one of the, on the left side here, we have NIRS, which is the near-infrared spectroscopy. And then on the right, left side, and then on the right side, we have the jugular bulb, which is the gold standard, or what used to be the gold standard. So near-infrared spectroscopy, as I've mentioned multiple times before, it is non-invasive, whereas its counterpart does so invasively. Near-infrared spectroscopy does measure all of its measurements continuously. So as long as the patient is hooked up to the sensors, right before the patient goes under general anesthesia, we're able to obtain a baseline reading and then monitor our patient throughout the entirety of the procedure. Whereas doing so through the jugular bulb, it is non-continuous. Like I said, every 10 to 15 minutes, we're getting one data point per, I guess, blood or per sample acquisition. Near-infrared spectroscopy gives us an exact regional measurement. So right underneath the sensors, we know exactly how oxygenated the blood is right there. So when we place them on the temporal lobes, whereas the jugular bulb gives us an overall jugular venous measurement. Like I've mentioned before, it is very user-friendly as long as you have the necessary training to use the equipment and the software or the monitor. You're good to go, and you can set up your patient and monitor him or her. Whereas the jugular bulb is a lot more healthcare practitioner dependent, as I've mentioned before. So taking into consideration all the pain points that were currently on the market, Mesphere Life Sciences really wanted to bring about a solution that addresses all of these issues and kind of does like an encompassing or a really just answers all of the questions that we may have. So and thereby we wanted to present Neuros. So it is currently the only reusable cerebral oximeter on the market with the highest accuracy, as well as having both regional oxygenation and blood volume index. So I'm going to take the next few minutes here to talk a little bit more about our product and our solution and how it could be beneficial to perfusionists or really anyone that has patients go on a heart-lung machine. So there's something that we like to say, which is called the Mesphere advantage, or really what our guarantee is when you are using any one of our solutions, but in particularly today, the Neuros sensors. So like I've mentioned before, our sensors are currently the only sensors on the market that are reusable. So we're able to deliver superior signal quality, exceptional value, all while reducing waste production as well as per patient cost. Of course, with our sensors being reusable, we're disposing a lot less of plastic or any sort of components that need to go into making of the sensors. And so by doing that as well, we're definitely reducing the cost needed to develop these sensors. Our placement does have it is ideal placement and ideal size, as is depicted by the picture over here on the right-hand side. So the sensors get placed right over on your temporal lobes, but it really opens up the forehead space for any other additional sensors that might need to get placed, such as the this sensor. A few anesthesiologists like to use that as well. And the sensors are honestly a great solution for beach chair position surgeries, since during surgery, the patients are at a 30 to 45% incline, and so the blood flow needs to get monitored to ensure that the patient is receiving adequate oxygen or blood flow to the brain. Of course, we also have our patented amplification. So this allows for any sort of calculation or amplification that needs to happen at the sensor level, and the data just gets transferred over or transmitted over to the monitor, thereby reducing any sort of noise or static that may occur from data being transferred through the wires. A few of our product features that I wanted to run through or by you guys today is our accuracy. So this is our pride and joy. We currently are at the highest approved accuracy on the market, sitting at plus or minus 1.5%. Of course, along with regional tissue oxygenation, what we also provide is a few additional parameters such as the blood volume index. This measurement closely correlates to the blood vessel dilation and constriction, and it's just another parameter that physicians like to monitor in addition to the cerebral oximetry. It is very easy to use. We like to say it is a plug-and-play integration, because as long as you plug the USB into the USB ports on the patient monitor, it is very simple and the calculations happen almost instantaneously. Of course, we also have our worldwide approvals. We have our FDA, our Health Canada, our CE marks, our ICOs, and a bunch of other global certifications required in different countries. I wanted to give you guys a quick look at the software or the user interface before I switch screens and go into a live demonstration. But over here at the top, we have what I like to call a summary of saturation ranges. I'll walk you through a little bit more about that in the demonstration, but generally it just gives us a live overview of what is happening throughout the reading. We also over here have our continuous regional oxygenation saturation, so that's our live value, whereas over here we have our baseline reading, and automatically we have our variation from baseline calculated to show either an increase or a decrease denoted by the upward or downward arrow. We also have our blood volume index over here in white, and then our baseline, and then again our variation from baseline. We also have historic and live data plots depicted by this line that kind of goes through the data plots. On the left side, we have our historic data, and then on the right side, we have our live data. So I'm going to take this moment right now, to quickly walk you guys through a little bit more about the product, showcase it to you a little bit more, and then share my screen so that you guys can see the user interface. So over here behind me, I have our patient monitor that you can see over here. So it is a medical grade monitor. It is touch screen, so I can go ahead and touch a bunch of stuff. And then at the bottom over here, we have our USB connectors. So I have one of the sensors plugged in right now, but we do have 3 other ports open to plug in any other additional sensors that we may need. And then of course we have our power supply as well. So to take a closer look at the sensors, over here we have photo emitters and photo detectors. So these are our photo emitters, and then these are our photo detectors. And they're placed in this configuration to provide ample a radial scan of the data points, so that when we're penetrating and trying to understand or calculate the oxygenation levels, that we're getting a broader scope. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen into the user interface. And I'm going to go ahead and go into demo mode and walk you guys through a little bit about how this product works. So as I've showcased before, we have our continuous or our live data points over here, and in a short period of time, we'll also get our baseline reading. In the meantime, I'll walk you through the features that are presented up here at the top. So we're able to set a baseline automatically or manually, depending what the physician would like. We can also set event markers, and when we click on event markers, we have a predetermined list to choose from pertaining to either the OR or the ICU, or of course we can even enter our own custom event that we can type in and it would appear right on the screen. Yep. And then we can view any of the events that we have placed. And then this neat timescale option allows us to view the data at a historic 15 minutes prior, 30 minutes prior, 1 hour, and so on and so forth. And then you're also able to see up to 5 minutes of live data that is happening. I always like to keep mine at 15 to 5, but it is completely up to user preference. As I showcased before, we do have either 4 different slots or 2. 4 USB ports, so you can either have 4 channels being displayed or 2 at a time. We normally do 4 channels if we're doing peripheral monitoring of the patients too, so if we have our sensors placed on the knees or any peripheral limbs, but oftentimes we limit it to 2 channels if we're just doing day 2 sensors on the temporal lobe. Over here, we have a button that is called tabular. So we're going to go ahead and click on that and then click on time chart. And so about every 10 to 15 minutes, there comes a data point here that tells you the time and the values that were calculated at that specific time. So around 3:17 today, these were the values that were recorded in all of the different sensors. So this is the left 1 sensor, right 1 sensor, left 2, right 2, and so on and so forth. We also have the option of looking at a range chart. So this is very important because, as I've mentioned before, of course, we want to monitor the values throughout the entirety of the surgery, but what's also very important to monitor is the duration of any sort of desaturation event that has occurred. So anything below 50 would be considered a desaturation event. And so as you can see here, the patient or the mock patient, since we're in demo mode, has spent about 2.5 minutes in the range of 61 to 70% saturated. If the patient had gone through a desaturation event, their time would be calculated anywhere over here, which would give us an indication of how severe the desaturation event or any sort of measures that we would need to take afterwards. Over here at the top, we also have an option to enter a patient ID. So we're going to just go ahead and click on this icon over here. And then we're also able to enter patient ID according to how the hospital would like to record their medical records or, keep track of their data or anything, any sort of thing like that. So that's pretty much it to walk you guys through the user application, the importance of why we need to use it, and why more and more physicians and hospitals are adapting cerebral oximetry as sort of a standard of care, something that they believe to be very useful and beneficial to have throughout the entirety of the procedure and not just preoperatively or postoperatively as well. So I know that there's a question and answer period afterwards, so I won't say I'll open up the floor to questions now, but if anyone does have any questions, I don't think I can hear you guys. I think you can just hear and see me, so we'll see how that works later on.
Thanks, Laura. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah, we'll open up a Q&A after the session.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for attending today and for listening to this presentation. I have my contact information up here, so it's lara.al-nakib@mespeer.com. Please feel free if you want to reach out for any questions or concerns regarding today's presentation or even just the product. I also have my colleague Allison.Kraus@mespeer.com's email also posted here, so feel free to reach out to either one of us. All right, thank you so much.